Welcome to Candlelight Mystery, a cozy corner of gentle intrigue and atmospheric storytelling. Here, classic-style British mysteries glow softly beside warm candlelight. Settle in, sip something comforting, and enjoy calm, thoughtful tales that invite you to relax, unwind, and explore suspense. Wrapped in serenity, step into Candlelight Mystery, where every flicker reveals a hidden clue and every shadow holds a quiet secret. Here, mysteries unfold not with noise, but with elegance, patience, and calm. Our stories invite you into warm, atmospheric worlds inspired by classic British detectives, gentle puzzles, and human nature's subtle truths. Whether it's a seaside village, a quiet country inn, or a fog-lit street, each tale offers peaceful suspense and thoughtful intrigue. Light a candle, settle in, and let your curiosity guide you through mysteries crafted for comfort, reflection, and imagination. Welcome to your new cozy escape. Chapter 1. A quiet departure. The sea stretched out like a sheet of polished pewter, calm and softly shimmering under the early morning light. The luxury ocean liner SS Ardenleigh waited at the dock like a grand old lady preparing herself for a graceful promenade across the Atlantic. Her white hull gleamed, her brass fittings polished to perfection, and her flags fluttered lightly in the gentle breeze. Porters hurried about with luggage carts calling to one another, while passengers, in varying degrees of excitement, anticipation, and self-importance, made their way up the gangway. Among them was a small, neatly dressed elderly woman in a pale blue coat and a sensible hat. Miss Jane Marple paused at the foot of the gangway, glancing up at the impressive vessel with an expression of quiet wonder mixed with mild apprehension. Traveling, she reflected, was always a curious business. One never quite knew what one might encounter, human nature being eternally surprising. Still, her doctor had insisted a holiday would be good for her health. Fresh sea air, Miss Marple, change of scenery, absolute rest. No village matters to trouble you. Miss Marple had smiled politely, secretly unconvinced about the last promise. Human behavior, after all, did not cease simply because one crossed an ocean. As she handed her ticket to the steward waiting at the top of the gangway, she felt a little flutter of excitement. She rarely travelled so grandly, and there was something faintly romantic about a sea voyage. The steward smiled, checked her name, and directed her to her cabin on the promenade deck. It was small but comfortable, furnished with dark wood, soft lamps, and a charming little porthole that framed the morning sea like a painting. She had scarcely begun unpacking when a sudden burst of lively conversation drifted through the corridor. A familiar voice rose distinctly above the rest. "Non, non, my friend, this trunk must not be handled so roughly. It contains very delicate and important items. Please, great care if you please." Miss Marple froze, her hand still resting atop a neatly folded cardigan. That voice, that unmistakable voice. She stepped out into the corridor, peering curiously toward the commotion. And there, flourishing his hands in theatrical protest, stood Hercule Poirot, his immaculate moustaches gleaming, his grey suit perfectly pressed, and his patent leather shoes reflecting the corridor lights like mirrors. "Hercule Poirot!" Miss Marple exclaimed before she could stop herself. Poirot turned sharply, surprise flickering across his poor, expressive face before melting into warm delight. "Mademoiselle Marple, but this is most extraordinary. You, here, on the Ardenleigh. It must be fate with excellent taste." Miss Marple gave a modest smile. "Such coincidences do happen, Mr. Poirot. I am simply taking a little holiday." "Ah, but of course, and a well-deserved one, I am certain." Poirot clicked his heels together politely. "You travel alone?" "Yes," Miss Marple said. "You as well, I assume?" "But naturally," although Poirot lowered his voice conspiratorially, "some mysteries have a way of finding me, even upon the Panji Sea." Miss Marple chuckled softly. "Human nature does tend to be consistent, no matter the location." They chatted a few moments longer, pleasantly surprised by the unexpected companionship. Poirot insisted she join him later on deck for tea, and then returned to instructing the bewildered crew on how precisely his luggage must be placed. Miss Marple returned to her cabin, quite pleased. It was comforting to know someone of Poirot's keen mind was aboard. One must never assume a sea voyage would be uneventful. By late afternoon, the passengers had gathered in the grand dining hall for the welcome reception. The room glowed with warm light from crystal chandeliers, casting a golden sheen over polished cutlery and crisp white tablecloths. Waiters moved gracefully among the tables, offering champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played gentle melodies in the corner. Miss Marple, seated near the centre of the room, regarded her fellow passengers with quiet curiosity. A broad-shouldered businessman with a heavy watch chain, a glamorous widow whose diamonds sparkled rather too conspicuously, a shy young couple honeymooning with nervous excitement, a professor with ink-stained fingers, a maid who lingered longer than necessary near certain tables, watching faces instead of plates. People revealed themselves in the smallest of ways. Poirot joined her a few minutes later, offering a courteous bow before taking his seat. "A charming group, n'est-ce pas?" he murmured. "Quite," Miss Marple replied, "though I suspect some have more on their minds than holiday pleasures." Poirot smiled knowingly. "Ah, Miss Marple, how delightful to observe with you again." The captain soon rose to give a short, welcoming speech, his voice warm and reassuring. He praised the ship's immaculate design, its esteemed passengers, and the peaceful voyage ahead. But before he could finish, a sudden gasp cut through the room. A tall, distinguished gentleman, one of the wealthiest passengers aboard, judging by his finely tailored suit and the way people glanced at him, swayed where he stood. His glass slipped from his hand, shattering across the polished floor. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed heavily onto the carpet. The room erupted into chaos. Miss Marple stood instantly. Poirot was already moving, his sharp gaze sweeping the room before he crouched beside the fallen man. Waiters rushed forward. A woman screamed. Someone shouted for a doctor. Poirot's voice rang out, calm yet authoritative. "Stand back, if you please. Give the man space." Miss Marple quietly stepped to the opposite side, observing everything. Man's pallor, the odd scent near him, the expressions of those closest, and the curious mix of shock and something else, guilt, fear, flashing across a few faces. The doctor arrived and knelt beside the man, checking his pulse with trembling fingers. Poirot murmured, "You see, Miss Marple, even on the calmest sea, trouble finds its way." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Yes, Mr. Poirot, and I believe it has only just begun." The dining hall remained hushed, except for the soft, anxious murmurs of passengers gathered in small clusters, watching as the unconscious man was lifted carefully onto a stretcher. The captain followed close behind the doctor, issuing quiet instructions to the staff. Guests were urged to remain calm, to return to their tables, and to continue their meals while the ship's medical team attended to the incident. But the calm they attempted to impose did not quite settle. A tension lingered in the air, like the faint taste of salt before a storm. Miss Marple, having observed the scene intently, slipped into her seat as the attendants moved the man from the hall. Poirot joined her a moment later, his expression thoughtful, his eyes narrowed in silent deduction. "You saw his fall, Miss Marple?" Poirot asked softly. "I did," she replied, "and I saw quite a few other things as well." Poirot raised an eyebrow, inviting her to continue. "For instance," Miss Marple said delicately, "the lady seated just behind him, the one with the rather noticeable emerald brooch, seemed more startled than sympathetic, a curious reaction, considering how loudly she gasped. And the gentleman at the far table, the one with the heavy eyebrows, was watching him even before he collapsed." Poirot nodded approvingly. "Ah, Miss Marple, how wonderfully observant you are. I myself noticed that the glass he dropped had an unusual scent, one not associated with champagne." Miss Marple pursed her lips. "Something added, perhaps?" "It is a possibility," Poirot murmured. "Of course we must not jump to conclusions, but—" He paused as a steward approached their table with a bow. Captain Rochester requests the presence of both of you, sir and madam, in the chart room when convenient. He thought you might offer insight. Poirot gave a slight, proud smile. But of course, Hercule Poirot is always at the service of justice. Miss Marple, on the other hand, offered a gentle nod. We shall certainly come. The steward bowed again and retreated. Poirot leaned toward her. You see, Miss Marple, already we are invited to assist, though I had hoped for a peaceful voyage. Miss Marple smiled in that serene, grandmotherly way. One can hope, Mr. Poirot, but human behavior rarely obliges. They made their way to the chart room after the dining hall began to settle. The corridors of the ship were hushed now, the usual hum of conversation replaced by the soft creaking of polished wood and the distant thrum of engines. The chart room was warm, its walls lined with maps, barometers, instruments, and maritime charts marked by small, precise notations. Captain Rochester stood near the large central table, his cap removed, his expression grim. Mr. Poirot, Miss Marple, thank you for coming. Poirot folded his hands neatly. We are at your disposal, Captain. The captain sighed. The man who collapsed Mr. Horace Pendleton, a wealthy financier. He is alive, but unconscious. The doctor says it could be a poisoning, though he won't make a definitive statement without proper testing. Miss Marple exchanged a glance with Poirot. The captain continued, I cannot have a panic on my ship. We're at sea for 6 days, and until we reach port, we must handle this delicately. If this was foul play, I would ask you both to help me get to the bottom of it. Poirot inclined his head. Naturally, Captain, we shall do all we can. Miss Marple added gently, if there is wrongdoing, it is only right we discover it. Lives may depend upon it. Captain Rochester gestured toward a small tray on the table. On it rested the broken pieces of Pendleton's champagne glass. We retrieved this. Poirot examined the shards, lifting one gingerly with a handkerchief. The scent remains faintly, something bitter, perhaps a toxin added swiftly, unnoticed. Miss Marple looked thoughtful. It must have been done moments before he drank it, and by someone close enough to reach the glass without attracting attention. The captain nodded. There were only a few people near him, his assistant, Miss Clara Finch, a gentleman named Mr. Dalton, and Mrs. Estelle Boehmer, the woman with the emerald brooch. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Interesting group, Miss Marple asked softly. Do you know if Mr. Pendleton had enemies, Captain? The captain hesitated. We have no record of any trouble, but wealthy men often have complicated associations. Poirot straightened. We must speak to the witnesses, each in their own time. The captain agreed. I can arrange private interview rooms to you. After leaving the chart room, Poirot and Miss Marple strolled slowly along the deck. The night air was cool and fresh as the ship cut through the dark water, its wake glowing faintly under the moonlight. Lanterns along the deck cast soft pools of light, and the occasional passenger passed by, whispering anxiously. Poirot walked with hands behind his back, deep in thought. This is a curious beginning, Miss Marple. Yes, she said, and I fear it may not be the last disturbance we face. Poirot stopped beside the railing. Tell me, Miss Marple, what did you observe most clearly? She looked out at the shimmering sea. That someone in the room knew this would happen. Poirot's eyes widened a fraction. Indeed. Yes, she said simply. There was fear on one face before the man even fell. Poirot stared at her, impressed. Mademoiselle Marple, I think this voyage has become most intriguing. Miss Marple gave a quiet, almost sorrowful smile. Intrigue, Mr. Poirot, is seldom pleasant, but we shall find the truth, that much is certain. As the ship sailed steadily into the night, the sea calm yet concealing its secrets, both detectives knew the first act of the mystery had only just unfolded. Chapter 2. Voices in the chart room. Morning came wrapped in a soft grey light, the horizon barely a pale line where the sea met the sky. The SS Ardenleigh moved steadily forward, her engines humming gently like a distant, reassuring heartbeat. Yet, inside the ship, reassurance was in short supply. Whispers had spread. Passengers spoke in lowered tones over breakfast, glancing toward the door as though expecting dramatic news at any moment. The word poisoning had not officially been used, but rumors rarely waited for confirmation. Miss Marple sat at a small table by the window in the breakfast lounge, her teacup cradled lightly in her hands. She watched the room without seeming to, young women leaning closer to each other, exchanging secrets, men pretending to read newspapers while their eyes roamed restlessly, a steward moving, a little too quickly, clearly anxious to be away from questions. Poirot approached with his usual neat precision, carrying his own cup on a saucer, a folded napkin draped over one arm, as though he were both guest and maître d'. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said. "I see the appetite of the comparentu passengers has diminished somewhat." "Yes," Miss Marple replied, her eyes still travelling gently over the room. "Fear tends to interfere with digestion, I find, even more so than bad cooking. Not that the cooking here is bad, of course." Poirot chuckled. "Indeed not. The croissants are excellent. It is merely the atmosphere that is heavy." He sat down opposite her. For a moment they said nothing, each lost in their own stream of quiet examination. "How is Mr. Pendleton?" Miss Marple asked at last. Poirot's expression sobered. "Still unconscious, according to the doctor. His condition is uncertain. The good doctor is not a man who likes uncertainty, and it shows in his manner." "Poor man," Miss Marple said gently. "Both of them." "Just so," Poirot agreed. "The captain has arranged for us to begin our conversations with those who were nearest to Pendleton when he surprise collapsed. We are to use a small sitting room just off the chart room, very discreet, very proper." Miss Marple nodded. "Then people will know exactly what is happening and speculate twice as much." "Ah," Poirot said, his eyes twinkling. "But of course." They finished their tea and made their way through the corridor, the carpet soft beneath their feet. The sitting room they had been given was modest but comfortable: 2 armchairs, a small sofa, a polished table, and a window that looked out on nothing but pale, endless sea. The captain greeted them briefly and then departed with brisk thanks, promising to send the first person in. Poirot chose a chair slightly set apart, facing the door. Miss Marple sat to one side, knitting in hand, her needles clicking softly. She knew from long experience that people spoke more freely when they felt slightly overlooked. The door opened, and Clara Finch entered. She was a young woman in her late 20s, smartly dressed in a simple navy dress with a neat white collar. Her hair was pinned back in a sensible style, and she carried a slim leather folder clutched too tightly in her hands. Her eyes were shadowed with worry, but there was a steadiness in her gaze that suggested she was more capable than she looked at first glance. "Miss Finch," Poirot said, rising slightly, "please, do sit down. We are very grateful you have agreed to speak with us." Clara sat on the edge of the sofa, spine straight. "The captain said I should cooperate with you fully, Mr. Poirot." "Of course I will." Miss Marple offered her a gentle smile over her knitting. "Such a shock it must have been for you, my dear. You work closely with Mr. Pendleton, I understand." "Yes," Clara said, swallowing. "I am his personal assistant. I manage his correspondence, appointments, travel arrangements, and, on this trip, some business negotiations he intended to conduct in New York." Poirot folded his hands. "You were near him when he collapsed, were you not?" "I was standing just behind his left shoulder," she said. "I had some papers with me, in case he wanted to discuss anything with one of the other passengers, Mr. Dalton in particular." Poirot glanced at her folder. "Ah, these are the papers?" She nodded. "Yes, contracts, proposals, nothing more." "You say Mr. Dalton was involved in business with Mr. Pendleton?" Clara hesitated, then nodded again. "Yes, Mr. Dalton has been pressing for a certain investment deal. Mr. Pendleton liked to keep his options open. I don't know the details. He did not always share everything with me." Miss Marple looked up from her knitting. "And how was his mood just before he collapsed?" Clara's lips trembled slightly. "He seemed pleased with himself, confident. He often did, to be honest. He was used to getting what he wanted, but he was also restless. When Mrs. Boehmer came over to speak with him, he seemed irritated. "Mrs. Estelle Boehmer?" Poirot asked. "Yes. She joined our table uninvited, or so it seemed to me. She laughed too loudly, touched his arm, and spoke about old times in Monte Carlo. Mr. Pendleton did not like being reminded of old times unless he himself chose the subject." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "People do dislike being reminded of things they'd rather forget." Clara's gaze flickered toward her gratefully. "Exactly." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Did he eat or drink anything just before he fell?" "Yes," Clara said slowly. "He finished his champagne, and he had just taken a sip from the fresh glass the is brought. Waiter brought moments earlier. He complained that the first glass had gone flat, I remember, because he made a rather pointed remark about standards on luxury liners." "And who handled the second glass?" Poirot asked. The waiter placed it in front of him. "No one else touched it, as far as I saw." "I would swear it." Poirot nodded. "And where were Mrs. Boehmer and Mr. Dalton at that moment?" "Mrs. Boehmer had gone back to her seat, but she was still watching us. Mr. Dalton was at the same table but farther down, speaking to someone else. He looked up just as Mr. Pendleton dropped the glass." 18. Clara's fingers tightened on the folder. "Is it really possible someone did this on purpose? Mr. Pendleton can be difficult, but—" Miss Marple's voice was gentle. "You've known him long, my dear?" 4 years, Clara said. "He's demanding, but fair. Or at least, he believes himself to be." Poirot exchanged a glance with Miss Marple. "We will not make assumptions just yet, Miss Finch, but I thank you for your frankness." Clara rose, hesitated, then said quietly, "Mr. Pendleton has enemies, many of them, but I never thought anything like this would follow him onto a ship." Miss Marple studied her face. "And you, Miss Finch, did you ever feel wronged by him?" Clara's eyes flashed, then quickly dimmed. "He is my employer," she said firmly. "I know my place." Which, Miss Marple reflected, was not at all an answer but a very revealing statement nonetheless. After Clara left, Poirot sighed softly. A capable young woman, yet full of suppressed resentment, not unusual where powerful men are concerned. "No," Miss Marple agreed. "I've seen such arrangements in the village. People carry their burdens politely until something snaps, but I don't think Miss Finch has snapped. Not yet." Poirot smiled faintly. "We shall see." The door opened again, and this time a tall, broad-shouldered man entered. His dark hair was neatly combed, his suit impeccably cut, but his expression held the kind of easy confidence that suggested a lifetime of believing doors would open for him. "Mr. Dalton," Poirot said, rising once more. "Captain says you want to talk," Dalton replied in a brisk British voice. "Happy to be of service, though I must say all this fuss is damned inconvenient." Poirot's eyes glinted. "For whom, I wonder?" he murmured under his breath. Mr. Dalton seated himself without waiting to be invited, crossing one leg over the other, his polished shoe swinging with faint impatience. He gave Poirot a quick once-over, then glanced briefly at Miss Marple, dismissing her as one might dismiss a kindly but irrelevant aunt. Poirot noticed. Poirot always noticed. "Mr. Dalton," he said calmly, "you were dining at Mr. Pendleton's table last night." "Yes," Dalton replied. "We've done business before, or tried to. Pendleton was a tricky fellow. Slippery, you might say." Miss Marple's knitting needles kept their calm, steady rhythm. "And yet you were travelling on the same ship, going to the same destination," she observed mildly. "That must indicate some shared purpose, surely." Dalton's mouth tightened for a fraction of a second. "We were both bound for New York, that's all. The world is small in those circles, Miss Marple," she supplied gently. "Just Miss Marple." Dalton nodded with distracted politeness, then turned back to Poirot. "Look, is Pendleton going to live? No one seems to know." "The doctor is doing all he can," Poirot said. "You are concerned for his health?" Dalton shrugged. "I'm concerned about the mess, frankly. If word gets out that some investor giant was poisoned on this ship, it'll cause a scandal. Investors don't like scandal. They like calm seas and steady profits." "Ah," Poirot said. "Profits. You had a business proposal for Mr. Pendleton, I understand." Dalton gave a tight smile. Is that what Finch told you? She's efficient, but she doesn't always grasp the full picture. Yes, I had a proposal, a shipping and real estate venture. Pendleton was interested last year, then cooled off. Lately he'd hinted he might reconsider. Miss Marple looked up. So you would benefit if he recovered, or if he did not. Dalton turned to her, a flash of irritation in his eyes. If he recovers, he signs. If he doesn't, his estate is tied up for months, maybe years. That's hardly convenient for me, Miss Marple, but not impossible to use, she said softly. Dalton's face hardened. Are you suggesting I tried to kill him in the middle of a crowded dining room? I'm ambitious, not suicidal. Poirot raised a placating hand. We suggest nothing yet, Monsieur Dalton. We merely collect impressions. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual about Mr. Pendleton before? He collapsed? Yes, Dalton said slowly. He was smug, more than usual. He'd just told me he'd made a decision, but then he refused to say what it was. Said he preferred to watch people squirm. That was very like him. And his drink? Poirot asked. You saw the second glass of champagne placed before him? I did. The waiter brought it. I was speaking with another gentleman at the time, but I noticed Pendleton wrinkle his nose before he drank. I thought he was about to complain again. Miss Marple's needles paused mid-click. Wrinkled his nose, did he, at the smell? So it seemed, Dalton said. But he drank anyway, then he fell. That's all. Poirot tapped a finger thoughtfully on the arm of his chair. You did not touch his glass or his plate? No, Dalton said firmly. I'm not a poisoner, Mr. Poirot. I do my fighting in the boardroom. Of course, Poirot replied smoothly. You are free to go, monsieur. Merci for your time. Dalton rose, hesitated as though considering whether to say more, then merely nodded and left the room. When the door closed, Miss Marple exhaled softly. A very confident man, too confident to be at ease with uncertainty. Just so, Poirot agreed. He is irritated but not frightened, or if he is, he hides it well. Miss Marple resumed her knitting. I've often thought, she said mildly, that those who are accustomed to control find it very hard to accept that anything could happen without their influence. Ah, Poirot said, smiling. You think he is the type who must be in charge of the game, even if he is not the one who set the board? Something like that, yes. The door opened once more, and this time Mrs. Estelle Boehmer swept in. She was elegantly dressed in a cream silk gown, her blonde hair arranged in soft waves, her lips painted the exact shade to suggest effortless sophistication. The emerald brooch Miss Marple had noticed the night before glittered at her shoulder like a captured forest in miniature. Her perfume reached the room a second before she did, sweet, heady, and unmistakable. My dears, she said in a low, musical voice, I do hope we can be quick. These sorts of interviews make everyone terribly nervous. Poirot stood, bowing slightly. Madame Boehmer, we are honoured. Please do sit. She sank gracefully into the armchair, arranging her skirt just so. Her eyes darted briefly to Miss Marple, then away, filing her instantly under harmless. Poirot began gently. You knew Mr. Pendleton from before this voyage, I understand. Oh, we circulated in similar circles, she said with a light laugh. Monte Carlo, Paris, the Riviera. Horace did love to be seen. He liked people to know he was winning. Winning at what, exactly? Miss Marple asked in her mild voice. Mrs. Boehmer smiled faintly. Cards, deals, women, life, he would have said. Poirot noted the faint, brittle edge beneath her amusement. And you, madame? Did you like Mr. Pendleton? I liked his money, she said cheerfully. I dare say many people did. He could be charming when it suited him, but I would not call him a gentleman. Not truly. You joined his table last night, Poirot said. Uninvited, according to Miss Finch. Boehmer's eyes glinted. Clara Finch disapproves of me. She finds me frivolous. But yes, I joined them. I saw Horace and thought, why not? We shared certain memories. I reminded him of them. He was not pleased. Miss Marple's needles paused again. Not pleased, my dear? No, Boehmer said, leaning back. He did not like being Boehmer. Reminded of a time in Monte Carlo when he lost badly. lost more than he could afford. There was a woman involved. Naturally, there often is. He preferred that particular incident forgotten. "Was that woman you, madame?" Poirot asked. Beaume smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Does it matter?" "It might," Miss Marple said kindly. "Most grudges begin with something personal." Beaume's eyes flicked to hers. For a moment, a hint of respect softened her gaze. "Horace and I had our misunderstandings, but I don't poison people at dinner, Miss Marple, especially not when the champagne is being poured by someone else." Poirot tilted his head. "And you noticed nothing unusual just before he collapsed?" "I noticed," Beaume said, "that he seemed delighted with himself. He told me, rather triumphantly, that some people were about to be taught a lesson." "A very expensive lesson," he said. Then he picked up his glass, smirked at Mr. Dalton down the table, and drank. She shrugged delicately. A moment later the glass was on the floor, and so was he. Tragic, but not, if I'm honest, entirely surprising. Men like Horace Pendleton make enemies as easily as they make profits. "And you, madame?" Poirot asked quietly. "Were you one of those enemies?" Beaume smiled slowly once more. "I am a survivor, Mr. Poirot. I don't waste my time on revenge. I let the past sink quietly to the bottom of the sea." Miss Marple's eyes rested on her face. "Things that sink have a way of washing back up, in my experience." Beaume's gaze sharpened for a brief second, then softened. "You are not nearly as harmless as you look, Miss Marple." "So I have been told," Miss Marple replied politely. After Mrs. Beaume had left, the room fell silent for a moment. Poirot walked to the window, looking out at the foaming wake behind the ship. "3 people," he said at last, "each of them with reason to resent Pendleton, each of them close enough to witness his fall, none of them apparently frightened for themselves." Miss Marple folded her knitting and placed it gently in her bag, which means perhaps that the one who is truly afraid has not yet been called in. Poirot turned, his eyes bright. "You think there is another?" "Oh, I should be very surprised if there were not," Miss Marple said. "In St. Mary Mead, whenever a great fuss is made about the most obvious suspects, there is always someone quiet in the background, hoping to remain unnoticed." "Then," Poirot said, "we must notice them." He straightened his tie, his entire posture sharpening. "Mr. Pendleton's illness," he said thoughtfully, "is not merely an attack upon a man, it is an opening move. And until we understand who is playing, we cannot foresee the end game." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle but unwavering. "And I think, Mr. Poirot, that the sea has not yet shown us all its secrets." Outside, the SS Ardenleigh sailed calmly on, leaving a long, rippling pattern in the water like a puzzle waiting to be read. Chapter 3. Secrets Below Deck. The SS Ardenleigh sailed smoothly through the mid-morning waters, but inside the ship, the calm was beginning to fray. Word of Mr. Pendleton's collapse had travelled farther and faster than the ship itself. By the time Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot emerged onto the main deck, they felt the subtle shift in atmosphere like a delicate thread pulled just a little too tight. Passengers lingered near the railings in pairs or small clusters, speaking in soft, nervous voices. Some cast furtive glances toward Miss Marple and Poirot, then quickly looked away, as though afraid they might be implicated simply by staring too long. Poirot, with hands neatly clasped behind his back, paced slowly beside Miss Marple. "Mon Dieu, the ship is a hive of whispers," he said. "Yes," Miss Marple replied gently. "People always sense when something is wrong, even when they try very hard to pretend otherwise." Poirot gave a small nod. "It is curious, is it not, how the truth begins to show itself first in the behaviour of others?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Human nature, Mr. Poirot, it always finds a way to speak." They were heading toward the captain's office when a young steward hurried up to them, pale and breathless. "Mr. Poirot, Miss Marple the captain asks you to come at once. There has been another matter." Poirot's moustaches twitched sharply. "Another matter? Bon, let us not waste time." Miss Marple followed calmly, though a small knot of worry tightened inside her chest. The steward led them down a narrow staircase to the lower decks, the parts of the ship less glamorous, more utilitarian. Pipes ran along the ceiling, and the scent of engine oil lingered in the air. They reached a small storage room near the laundry area. The door stood open, and Captain Rochester waited inside, his face grim. "There you are," he said. "I'm afraid the situation has become more complicated." A young cabin boy stood beside him, trembling, his eyes wide with fear. On the floor was a metal tray overturned, its contents scattered: cups, a cloth, a small bottle with its cap missing. Poirot stepped closer. "What is this?" The captain took a deep breath. "This boy, Edward, was carrying tea to the crew lounge when he slipped and dropped this tray. But that is not the real issue." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Then what is?" The captain pointed to the small bottle lying on its side. "This was found underneath the linen shelf. Edward swears it was not his." Miss Marple leaned down carefully, studying the bottle. What was inside? "A cleaning solution, or so it appears," the captain said. "Harmless enough, but it smells odd. The doctor believes it may contain something more dangerous, something that might match what affected Pendleton." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Poison, possibly," the captain said in a low voice. "We won't know until we test it properly. But if so, someone hid it here." Edward burst out. "I didn't do it, sir. I swear. I just clean the rooms and carry the trays. I'd never hurt anyone, never." Miss Marple stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on the boy's arm. "No one is accusing you, Edward, not at all. But perhaps you saw something? Or someone?" Edward shook his head violently. "I don't know, ma'am. I only came to fetch the tray. The shelf was closed when I arrived. When I opened it, well, that bottle fell out." Miss Marple's voice softened. "And you are certain you haven't seen anyone unusual near this area? Anyone who seemed out of place?" Edward hesitated. Poirot stepped closer. "Come now, mon garçon. You must tell us anything, no matter how small." The boy swallowed. "It's only that, last night, after the reception, I saw someone down here where they shouldn't have been." Poirot and Miss Marple exchanged a quick glance. "Who?" Poirot asked. Edward wrung his hands. "I don't know his name, but he was tall, broad, wore a dark coat. When he saw me, he hurried off toward the service stairwell." Miss Marple thought for a moment. "Could it have been Mr. Dalton?" Edward shook his head. "No, ma'am. This man wasn't dressed like a guest, more like, well, someone trying not to be noticed." Poirot considered the bottle on the floor, a hidden poison, a man lurking below deck, and a victim who may or may not survive. He straightened. "Captain, may we keep this bottle? There are certain methods I wish to employ." The captain nodded. "Of course, I'll instruct the doctor to assist." Poirot carefully wrapped the bottle in a clean cloth and placed it inside a leather case he had brought. Miss Marple watched him with quiet interest. "You believe this is connected to Mr. Pendleton?" Poirot gave her a small, meaningful look. "But of course, there is no coincidence in crime, Miss Marple, only pattern." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Then we shall have to find the person who hid this bottle, and why." Poirot gestured for Edward to step forward again. "One more question, Edward. When you saw the man last night, did he seem frightened, calm, angry?" Edward bit his lip. He looked nervous, like he was waiting for someone, or hiding from someone. Miss Marple's eyes softened. "Thank you, dear. You've been very helpful." The captain dismissed the boy, who scampered out, relieved. Poirot paced slowly along the narrow room. "So," he murmured, "someone attempted to conceal the evidence. A hasty job, badly executed. That suggests panic," Miss Marple said quietly. "Or fear." Poirot stopped. "Yes, fear." She turned toward the door. "We should investigate the passenger list again, and the crew list." Poirot nodded. "And we must not forget our friends, Miss Finch, Mr. Dalton, and Mrs. Boehmer. They may know more than they have said." Miss Marple climbed the stairs slowly, thoughtfully. "I suspect, Mr. Poirot," she said as they reached the upper deck, "that we are only just beginning to understand who Mr. Pendleton truly was." Poirot gave a small sigh. "Ah, Miss Marple, with a man like Pendleton there are always secrets, and secrets have a way of leaving a trail. She glanced at him. Even at sea? Poirot smiled faintly. Especially at sea, too, one's probred. Behind them, deep below deck, the storage room door swung closed, the quiet click echoing faintly through the ship like the closing of a chapter one that promised a far more dangerous one to follow. The midday sun glimmered across the SS Ardenleigh as Poirot and Miss Marple walked slowly. Along the quieter starboard deck, the sea stretched out endlessly, but neither detective felt comforted by the view. The discovery of the hidden bottle cast a long shadow. "Mr. Poirot," Miss Marple said gently, "do you believe the young cabin boy's story?" "I do," Poirot replied. "He is frightened, but not deceitful. You see, Miss Marple children lie with great difficulty. Their lies are clumsy, transparent. His story, however, had detail and fear in equal measure." Miss Marple nodded. "Then there truly was someone lurking where he should not be." "Oui," Poirot murmured. "A man, in a dark coat, perhaps one of the crew, perhaps a passenger in disguise, perhaps someone who wishes to walk unseen." They continued along the deck until they reached the captain's office. Captain Rochester greeted them with a deep frown. "I've just spoken to the doctor again," he said. "Pendleton is still unconscious. His breathing is shallow, but steady. I don't know when, if he'll wake." Miss Marple's face softened with sympathy. The poor man. Whatever his faults, no one deserves such a fate. Poirot folded his arms. "Captain, may we speak with the ship's purser? We need access to the full passenger registry and crew assignments as well." The captain nodded. "I've already instructed him to assist. He'll be in the purser's office. And Mr. Poirot, I trust you'll be discreet." Poirot touched his fingertips together. "Captain, Hercule Poirot is always discreet." Miss Marple smiled. "And I do my best." They made their way to the purser's office, a tidy room filled with filing cabinets and ledgers. The purser, a thin, pale man named Mr. Carmichael, greeted them politely and handed over the lists. Poirot scanned the passenger registry first. Horace, Pendleton, Clara Finch, Mr. Alfred Dalton, Mrs. Estelle Boehmer, dozens of others. Nothing leapt out immediately. But then Poirot looked at the crew list. "Miss Marple," he said slowly, "observe this name, Robert Halley, assistant steward, assigned to the lower decks. He boarded the ship at the last moment. No previous voyages recorded." Miss Marple leaned in. "A new hire? How unusual for such a grand ship." Poirot nodded sharply. "Very unusual." Carmichael shifted nervously. "We were short-staffed, Mr. Poirot. 2 stewards fell ill before departure. Halley came highly recommended. Or so we were told." Poirot narrowed his eyes. "Recommended by whom?" "By Mr. Pendleton," Carmichael said sheepishly. "He insisted." Poirot and Miss Marple exchanged a charged look. "Pendleton recommended him?" Miss Marple repeated softly. "That is correct," Carmichael said. "He said Halley had served him before and was trustworthy." Poirot walked to the porthole, staring at the restless sea. "Miss Marple," he said quietly, "our victim chose this man, brought him aboard, and now a bottle of poison is found near his work area." Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked in, her mind, though her hands were empty. "That suggests 2 possibilities," she said. "Either Pendleton trusted the wrong man, or Halley was placed there for reasons Pendleton did not understand." Poirot nodded. "Exactly." Miss Marple looked thoughtful. "We must find this Halley." Carmichael swallowed. "He's not on shift. I believe he's in his cabin." Poirot gave a curt bow. "Thank you, monsieur. You have been most helpful." They headed toward the crew cabins. The corridors grew narrower, dimmer, the air heavier. Miss Marple walked slowly, thoughtfully, as always listening not only to what people said, but to what places said, too. They reached cabin 14B. Poirot knocked sharply. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. The captain, who had joined them at the last moment, stepped forward. "Stand back." He used a master key. The lock clicked. The door swung inward. The cabin was empty. Halley was gone. But the room was not untouched. Miss Marple stepped in carefully. A suitcase lay open on the bunk, half-packed. clothes thrown in hastily, a drawer left ajar, a shaving kit knocked to the floor. The cabin window was open, letting in a thin shaft of sunlight and a cold breath of sea air. Poirot moved toward the small desk where a folded note lay. He lifted it delicately. It contained only 5 words. "I didn't mean to do it." Miss Marple read the note over his shoulder, her expression tightening. "Oh dear," she whispered. Poirot's face hardened into sharp lines. "He has fled," Poirot said, "and running makes him guilty in the eyes of others." Miss Marple shook her head. "People run for many reasons, Mr. Poirot. Guilt is only one of them." Poirot looked at her, then slowly nodded. "Just so, Miss Marple, just so." He carefully folded the note and placed it in his pocket. "Captain," Poirot said, turning sharply, "we must search the entire ship for Robert Halley." The captain nodded. "I'll alert security." Miss Marple looked at the open window, the sea churning beyond. "And we must hurry," she said softly, "for the sea hides its secrets quickly." Chapter 4. Gathering Clouds. By late afternoon, the light over the ocean had changed. What had been a gentle silver shimmer in the morning now darkened to a restless slate. The horizon thickened with clouds, layered and heavy, as if the sky itself were lowering over the SS Ardenleigh. On deck, the wind had sharpened. Deck chairs were stacked and tied, awnings rolled back. Passengers were advised, with polite firmness, to remain indoors as the weather worsened. Miss Marple stood for a moment near a porthole in one of the interior lounges, watching the first drops of rain spatter against the glass. The sea heaved a little more than before, the ship answering with a slow, deliberate roll. "Storm coming," she murmured. Hercule Poirot joined her, hands folded neatly behind his back, his balance perfectly steady despite the subtle sway of the ship. "Indeed," he said. "Outside and inside, I think." Miss Marple gave a small wry smile. "Yes, people do show themselves more clearly under pressure." Poirot inclined his head. "We shall see who creaks most loudly when the wind rises." They had just left another brief meeting. With the captain, the search for Robert Halley was ongoing. Crew members had been discreetly questioned, storerooms checked, stairwells examined. So far, nothing. No sign of the assistant steward who had vanished, leaving only a half-packed suitcase and a short note of frightened guilt behind. Miss Marple sat down on a sofa as the ship rolled again, picking up her knitting. Poirot remained standing, pacing slowly across the lounge carpet. "Let us consider what we know," he said. "Pendleton is unconscious," Miss Marple replied calmly, casting on another row. "We do not yet know if he will survive." A bottle containing something suspicious was found below deck. Robert Halley, whom Pendleton himself recommended, has disappeared, and 3 passengers closest to Pendleton, all with possible motives, claim innocence. Poirot nodded. Miss Finch, the loyal assistant, with quiet resentment. Mr. Dalton, the impatient business partner who needs Pendleton alive, but might also profit if matters grew muddled. And Mrs. Boehmer, the woman with old memories and perhaps older grudges. A small group of passengers moved through the lounge, voices lowered. A woman clutched a shawl, a little too tightly around her shoulders, as though the impending storm could seep into her bones through the walls. Miss Marple continued, "And someone in a dark coat was seen below deck after the reception. We do not yet know whether this was Halley or someone else entirely." "Just so," Poirot said. "The pattern is forming, but there are gaps, and these gaps, they trouble me." A steward approached them quietly. "Mr. Poirot, Miss Marple, the captain, requests your presence in the infirmary. There has been a development with Mr. Pendleton." They followed the steward through the corridor. The ship gave a deeper lurch, and a low rumble of thunder could be heard in the distance. Electric lights flickered very slightly, then steadied. The infirmary was a narrow, bright room smelling of antiseptic and tension. Mr. Pendleton lay on a narrow bed, his face pale, his breathing shallow but regular. A thin sheen of sweat shone on his forehead. The doctor, a harried-looking man with tired eyes and ink on his cuff, stood at the bedside. "Ah," he said as they entered. "Good, you're here." Poirot glanced at Pendleton. "He has regained consciousness?" For a very short, Time, the doctor said. Just a few moments before slipping back. He rubbed his forehead, but he did say something, or tried to. Miss Marple stepped closer, her gaze gentle on the unconscious man's face. What did he say, doctor? The doctor frowned, searching his memory. It was difficult to hear. His voice was weak, but I leaned close and caught a few words. He said, I was wrong, not him, the other. And then something that sounded like door, or perhaps shore. Then he drifted out again. Poirot's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Not him, he repeated, curious. Yes, Miss Marple said. That suggests Pendleton had misjudged someone, perhaps suspected the wrong person, or trusted the wrong one. The ship shuddered as a stronger wave struck its side. Rain began to patter more heavily outside, a steady, insistent drum. The doctor adjusted Pendleton's blanket. I've given him something to keep him stable. If he wakes again, I'll send for you immediately. But I must warn you, it may not last. His organs are under strain. Whatever was in his system was no mild substance. Poirot nodded. Merci, doctor. Your information is most helpful. You have taken samples. From the glass and the bottle? Yes. I can't run a full analysis at sea, but I can confirm certain properties, the doctor said. It appears to be a complex mixture, not a simple household poison. Someone knew what they were using. Miss Marple's hands tightened slightly around her bag. That narrows the field in one way, she said, but widens it in another. People with access to such things do not always look like villains. Sometimes they are quite ordinary, even respectable. Poirot looked at the doctor. One more question, if you please. Could the same poison have been stored in that little bottle found below deck? The doctor gave a slow nod. Most likely, yes. The scent and residue are similar. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Then whoever hid that bottle is almost certainly the one who tried to kill Mr. Pendleton. Thunder rolled more clearly now, closer, like distant artillery over the waves. As they stepped back into the corridor, the lights flickered again, longer this time. A few passengers gasped. Somewhere, a plate crashed to the floor. Miss Marple steadied herself against the wall. It seems, Mr. Poirot, that nature is determined to add drama to our circumstances. Poirot smiled thinly. The storm outside, it may be loud, but it is the storm within these walls that interests me. They had just turned toward the stairwell when Clara Finch appeared at the end of the corridor, walking quickly, clutching her folder as though it were a shield. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with fatigue and worry. Mr. Poirot, she called softly. Miss Marple, the captain said you were with Mr. Pendleton. Is there any news? Will he? Her voice trailed off. Miss Marple studied her face. He woke for a moment, she said gently. He spoke a few words, then slipped back. Clara swallowed. What did he say? Poirot hesitated. He said, I was wrong, not him, the other. Clara's lips parted slightly, and a flicker of confusion crossed her features. Not him? The other who? That, Poirot said, is what we are trying to discover. Another roll of thunder growled overhead. The ship tilted more sharply this time, making Clara reach out to steady herself on the wall. Miss Marple said kindly, Perhaps you should rest, my dear. This must be a dreadful strain on you. Clara shook her head. I can't. There are documents to arrange. If Mr. Pendleton, if something happens, she swallowed, his affairs will be chaos. Poirot watched her closely. Madame Finch, were you aware that Mr. Pendleton personally recommended a man named Robert Halley to the ship's crew? Clara's eyes widened. Halley? He's here. You know. Him? Miss Marple asked. Clara nodded, colour draining from her cheeks. Yes, he used to work for Mr. Pendleton. Briefly, he was dismissed. There was some disagreement. I don't know the details, only that Mr. Pendleton said he could not be trusted. Poirot's eyebrows shot up. Yet it was Pendleton who recommended him for this voyage. Clara pressed a hand to her temple, then he changed his mind again. It is like him. He sometimes rehired those he had cast aside, if he believed he could use them anew. Use them? How? Miss Marple asked softly. Clara hesitated. Leverage. Information, Favour returned. Mr. Pendleton liked to keep people in his debt. The ship gave another jolt. This time the overhead light dimmed to a dull glow, then steadied again. From somewhere down the corridor, a bell began to clang sharp, insistent. Poirot turned immediately. "What is that?" Clara's face went white. "That's the internal alarm. Something's happened." Below deck, Miss Marple's heart gave a small, involuntary lurch. The storm, it seemed, had finally arrived. The alarm bell rang in short, urgent bursts, echoing along the corridor like a metallic heartbeat. Crew members rushed past Miss Marple, Poirot and Clara, moving toward the stairwell with practiced urgency. Captain Rochester appeared at the far end, his jaw set, his cap slightly askew from haste. "Mr. Poirot," he called. "Miss Marple, there's been another incident. This way, please." They descended quickly to the lower decks, the ship rocking more noticeably now. The air felt thicker here, closer, with the vibrations of the engines mingling with the rising hum of the storm outside. A faint smell of damp linen and metal lingered. They reached a narrow junction between two service corridors. A small group of crew members stood clustered there, tension written across their faces. As they parted, Miss Marple saw what lay at the center of their circle, a woman, lying motionless on the floor. Her head turned to one side, one arm flung awkwardly out, fingers splayed. "Miss?" Marple's breath caught. Clara Finch gasped aloud beside her, then covered her mouth. The woman on the floor was Mrs. Estelle Boehmer. Poirot knelt beside her, two fingers lightly placed at her throat. He leaned close, listening. "She is alive," he said. "Unconscious but alive." The doctor arrived moments later, breathing hard, his medical bag thumping against his leg. "What happened?" he demanded. A steward spoke up. "We found her like this, sir. One of the maids was bringing fresh towels to the officers' quarters and nearly tripped over her." Miss Marple's eyes drifted around. The scene, missing nothing, the narrowness of the corridor, the slightly uneven metal grating underfoot, the dim electric light that flickered with each roll of the ship, a scuff mark on the wall at shoulder height, and there near Mrs. Boehmer's hand, a small, dark object. "A button," she said, quietly. Poirot looked up. "Pardon, Miss Marple." She pointed delicately. A single dark button, glossy and plain, lay near Mrs. Boehmer's fingertips. It did not match her gown. Poirot picked it up with his handkerchief. "You are quite right. This did not fall from her dress. It belongs, I think, to a uniform, perhaps a steward or crew." The doctor examined Boehmer quickly. "No obvious bleeding," he muttered, "but there's a bruise forming at the back of her head. She may have been struck, or she may have fallen." Captain Rochester's mouth tightened. "In this weather, a fall is not impossible, but I don't like coincidences. Not today." Miss Marple said gently, "Nor do I, Captain, especially not when they involve the same cluster of people." They carefully lifted Mrs. Boehmer onto a stretcher and carried her toward the infirmary, the ship rocking more vigorously now as waves slapped against its hull. Thunder rolled again, nearer. The lights flickered once more. Clara Finch clutched the railing, watching the stretcher disappear around the corner. "Why was she even down here?" she whispered. "Passengers don't usually come to this part of the ship." Poirot tilted his head. "An excellent question, mademoiselle." A maid standing nearby, slight freckled with anxious eyes, spoke up hesitantly. "Please, sir, I might know." Miss Marple turned to her kindly. "Yes, my dear?" The maid twisted her cleaning cloth in her hands. "Mrs. Boehmer, she asked me earlier, which corridor would be quiet. She said she needed to speak to someone privately. She was very serious about it, not like she is upstairs all laughing and shining, if you know what I mean." Miss Marple nodded. "I do." "Did she say who she wanted to meet?" Poirot asked. The maid shook her head. "No, sir, only that it was important. She asked if the crew used this side corridor much. I told her it was mostly for laundry and supply routes. She seemed pleased, said it would do nicely." Poirot's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "So she arranged a secret meeting." Miss Marple's voice was, "And someone came." The captain dismissed the maid gently and turned to Poirot. "You think this was an attack?" Poirot considered. "It could be a fall. The ship is rolling more. but the bruise on the back of the head, the presence of this button, and her choice of location, it is all too much for chance, I think," Miss Marple added, and Mrs. Boehmer was one of the few who knew Mr. Pendleton's less respectable history. If Pendleton believed he had been wrong about someone, as he said, perhaps she knew who the other was. Clara swallowed visibly. "Do you think the same person who poisoned Mr. Pendleton tried to silence Mrs. Boehmer?" Poirot looked at her steadily. "It is a strong possibility, mademoiselle." The ship gave another heavy lurch, and a low creak sounded through the metal walls. Somewhere, a door slammed. Miss Marple steadied herself with a hand on the wall. "Whoever it is," she said, "they are growing desperate. Desperation often leads to mistakes." "And mistakes," Poirot murmured, "are what we rely upon." They followed the stretcher back toward the infirmary. Outside, the storm had fully arrived, rain lashing the portholes, wind shrieking faintly in the higher rigging. Each roll of the ship made the floors tilt and the lights sway. Inside the infirmary, Mrs. Boehmer was laid on a second bed near Pendleton. The doctor examined her again, then turned to the detectives. "She has a concussion," he said. "I can't tell yet if she was struck or if she hit her head in a fall, but she'll likely wake sooner than Mr. Pendleton. The question is, what will she remember?" Miss Marple looked at the two unconscious figures, side by side, the powerful financier and the glittering socialite, reduced now to fragile, helpless bodies under clean white sheets. "How curious," she said quietly. "The mighty so often end up sharing very small spaces." Poirot nodded once, gravely. "And their secrets, they are no respecters of status." The captain cleared his throat. "I've ordered another sweep of the ship. Every storage room, every stairwell, every deck. If Halley is on this ship, we'll find him." Miss Marple's gaze went distant for a moment. "Unless he has found a way off it," she murmured. The captain frowned. "At sea, there's no way off." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "There is always the sea itself, Captain, though it would be final." Clara shuddered. Miss Marple turned to the doctor. "If Mrs. Boehmer wakes, will you send for us?" "At once," the doctor said. As they left the infirmary, Poirot slowed his steps. "Miss Marple," he said, "what do you make of Pendleton's words now? Not him, the other." She walked beside him, the ship swaying gently underfoot. "I think, Mr. Poirot," she said softly, "that Mr. Pendleton believed one man to be his enemy and was wrong. The true danger may lie with someone he thought useful or unimportant, someone in the background, someone like Robert Halley, or someone using Halley as a convenient shadow." Poirot regarded her with admiration. "As always, you see the village pattern, even on the high seas." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "People are very much the same, whether in St. Mary Mead or on an ocean liner. Only the wallpaper changes." The storm boomed outside, and the lights flickered once more but held. Poirot straightened his tie. "Then we must look more closely at those who appear harmless. The quiet ones, the ones who move between worlds, passenger and crew, rich and poor, seen and unseen." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, because whoever is behind this, Mr. Poirot, is not finished yet." And as the SS Ardenleigh ploughed on through the dark, churning waters, it seemed the ship carried not just its passengers and crew, but a tightening knot of secrets, each one pulling slowly, inexorably, toward revelation. Chapter 5. Truth comes afloat. The storm lingered through the night, leaving the SS Ardenleigh rocking in slow, tired motions as morning broke. The clouds had thinned to a pale grey haze, and a soft drizzle fell across the decks, pattering gently on the railings. The storm had passed, but its tension remained a residue in the air, as though the sea itself remembered every secret whispered in its shadow. Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot stepped carefully along the passage toward the infirmary, having received word that one of the patients had stirred. The corridor lamps flickered intermittently, adjusting from the harsher emergency power used during the storm. Their footfalls were soft on the carpeted floor, but their expressions reflected a sharpened vigilance. Inside the infirmary, The doctor stood beside the bed where Mrs. Estelle Beaumont lay. Her eyes were half open, glazed but aware, her golden hair slightly dishevelled against the white pillow. She blinked slowly as Miss Marple approached. "Mrs. Beaumont," Miss Marple said gently, smoothing the bedsheet near her hand. "It's good to see you awake." Beaumont turned her head a fraction. "Miss Marple, is it? Everything feels heavy to thee." "That's to be expected," the doctor said. "You had a strong blow to the head. Please, don't strain yourself." Poirot moved closer, his posture formal yet considerate. "Madame Beaumont, you were found unconscious on the lower deck. You arranged a secret meeting, did you not?" Beaumont closed her eyes briefly, memory tugging through the fog. "Yes," she whispered. "I did." Miss Marple nodded encouragingly. "With whom, my dear?" Beaumont hesitated. Her throat worked. Then, I thought he wanted to see me," she murmured. "He sent a note." Poirot leaned closer. "He? Who is he?" "Mr. Pendleton," Beaumont whispered. "Or so I believed." Miss Marple and Poirot exchanged a sharp look. "You received a note?" Poirot asked. "Where is it?" Beaumont's eyes opened wider, a flicker of fear sliding through them. "Gone. When I woke, there was nothing." Poirot folded his hands, thinking. "Who delivered it?" "A steward," Beaumont said faintly. "Tall, dark coat. I didn't know his name." Miss Marple's voice softened. "Did he resemble Robert Halley?" "I don't know. It was dim. But, perhaps," her fingers twitched weakly against the sheet. "Pendleton wanted to tell me something about Monte Carlo. But when I reached the corridor, I was struck, or I fell. I cannot remember." Poirot paced quietly. "It was not Mr. Pendleton who summoned you, madame. He was in no position to send such a message." Beaumont's face drained. "Then someone used his name." "Oui," Poirot said softly, "to lure you to an isolated place." Miss Marple added, "And that suggests you had some information that threatened them." Beaumont breathed unevenly. "I know things about Pendleton, about people who owed him money, favors, secrets. I knew he had been afraid recently." Poirot's head snapped up. "Afraid? Pendleton?" Beaumont nodded slowly. "He told me someone was following him, someone he once trusted, but he wouldn't say who. He always liked to hold his cards close." "Did he give you any clue?" Miss Marple asked. "Any hint at all?" Beaumont wet her lips. He only said, "It will come from beneath." I assumed he meant the dealers in Monte Carlo, or old debts. Poirot and Miss Marple exchanged another look. "Beneath," Miss Marple repeated, "perhaps not metaphorically." Poirot said nothing, but his eyes gleamed with new calculation. The doctor stepped in gently. "That's enough for now. She needs rest." Beaumont exhaled a slow, shaky breath. "Please, find who did this, for Horace's sake." Poirot bowed his head. "We shall." As they left the infirmary, Clara Finch hurried toward them, anxiety etched deeply into her face. "Is Mrs. Beaumont awake? What did she say?" Poirot studied her. "Why such urgency, Mademoiselle Finch?" Clara swallowed. "Because Mr. Dalton is furious. He's been pacing the observation lounge, demanding answers. And he said something odd about Mr. Pendleton's business documents." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Odd?" "He claimed Pendleton had hidden a contract, one that would ruin Dalton if it ever surfaced, and he says Pendleton was planning to reveal it soon." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And do you believe him?" Clara hesitated. "Mr. Dalton exaggerates, but Pendleton did like to keep leverage. He could have kept such documents hidden," Miss Marple said, "and such documents might inspire someone to act rashly." Clara nodded. "Yes. If someone thought Pendleton meant to expose them, they might panic." Poirot touched his moustache thoughtfully. "We must speak with Dalton again. And also, someone else. Someone we have not properly examined." Clara blinked. "Who?" Poirot turned. "The waiter who delivered Pendleton's second glass." Miss Marple smiled with approval. "Yes, Mr. Poirot, the quiet ones, as we said before." They made their way to the steward's mess. The storm had loosened its grip, but the ship still pitched gently, the deck shifting beneath their feet. A faint tang of sea air and the scent of damp uniforms lingered. Inside the mess, a group of stewards sat with bowls of soup and mugs of tea. When Poirot entered, silence fell like a curtain. He surveyed them calmly, then addressed the nearest. "The waiter who served Mr. Pendleton at the welcome dinner, where is he?" A young man, slight, sandy-haired, eyes widened with guilt, slowly raised his hand. "Me, sir. I'm Thomas Green." Poirot approached him. "Monsieur Green, did you notice anything unusual about the second glass you gave to Mr. Pendleton?" Thomas swallowed. "Sir, it wasn't originally meant for him." Poirot stiffened. "Ah." Miss Marple leaned forward. "For whom was it meant, dear?" Thomas hesitated. "Mr. Dalton." He ordered a fresh glass, but as I walked off the précis, "Serving line," Mr. Pendleton called me sharply. Said his own was flat, so he took Mr. Dalton's glass from my tray. Poirot's eyes glinted. "And you allowed this?" "Sir," Mr. Pendleton insisted, very forcefully. Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on the boy's arm. "And did Mr. Dalton seem upset?" Thomas nodded. "Very." He glared at me. "Said I'd never worked on a proper ship before if I couldn't deliver a drink properly." Poirot turned slowly to Miss Marple. "So Pendleton drank a glass intended for Dalton." Miss Marple exhaled. "Then perhaps someone meant to poison Mr. Dalton, not Mr. Pendleton." Poirot tapped his fingers together, eyes burning bright. "At last, Miss Marple, we begin to see the outline." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, Mr. Poirot, the wrong man drank the wrong glass." "And that," Poirot said softly, "changes everything." Chapter 5. The Buried Motive. The revelation hung between them like a lantern suddenly lit in a dark cellar. Pendleton had consumed a drink intended for Dalton, a fact that shifted the entire landscape of their investigation. Miss Marple walked slowly with Poirot along the quieter port-side corridor, her hands clasped lightly in front of her. The ship rocked gently now, the storm's rage reduced to a steady, rhythmic sway. Lamps along the walls flickered occasionally with the ship's movement, but the worst had passed. "So," Miss Marple said thoughtfully, "if someone intended to harm Mr. Dalton, not Mr. Pendleton, our field of motives changes entirely." Poirot nodded. "Indeed, we must consider those who stand to benefit by Dalton's removal," Miss Marple continued, "and Pendleton's dying words, not him, the other. Perhaps he realized this in his final moments of clarity." Poirot smiled faintly. "Miss Marple, I believe we are following the same thread." They entered the ship's enclosed tea-room, a quiet space with a few armchairs, a dim lamp, and the soft ticking of a wall clock. It was empty at this hour, giving them a moment of uninterrupted contemplation. Poirot settled into a chair, fingers steepled, while Miss Marple moved to pour tea, her gentle movements somehow grounding the tension between them. "Let us list the motives again," Poirot said calmly. "Miss Finch, loyal assistant with suppressed resentment. Mrs. Boehmer, woman with history and hidden financial entanglements. Dalton, ambitious businessman, desperate to finalize a deal." Miss Marple brought him a cup. "And do not forget young Robert Halley, who disappeared so conveniently." Poirot nodded. "Just so. And yet, Halley was recommended by Pendleton. Perhaps Pendleton believed Halley could help him in some scheme, or perhaps Halley intended to use this connection to mask a crime." Miss Marple sat across from him. "Or perhaps Halley was used by someone else, manipulated, framed. There are many possibilities." Poirot sighed. "And all possible. But we must narrow. Start with the glass." Miss Marple nodded. "Poisoned for Mr. Dalton." "Why Dalton?" Poirot asked. "What makes him worthy of so grave an action?" Miss Marple considered. "He mentioned a contract, one Pendleton had hidden, one that could ruin him." Poirot's eyes brightened. "Ah, so Dalton had much to lose, and others had something to gain," Miss Marple finished. "Oui," Poirot said. "If Dalton were discredited or removed, whose fortunes would rise?" Miss Marple thought quietly. "Perhaps someone he defeated in business, or someone who resented him greatly." Poirot nodded slowly. "Or someone who relied upon him financially, yet feared he might retract support." Miss Marple sipped her tea, then glanced toward the corridor. "What if the motive is not business alone, Many crimes, Mr. Poirot, are far more personal than they appear. Poirot paused. Personal? Yes, Miss Marple said softly. Dalton is very confident, overly confident. Such men often make enemies without realizing it. Poirot's eyebrows lifted. Meaning? Miss Marple smiled gently. Meaning, Mr. Poirot, that Dalton strikes me as the sort of man who has broken promises, perhaps hearts, perhaps more. Poirot considered this. A lover's quarrel? A jilted partner? Miss Marple shrugged. Human behavior is predictable. Hurt pride can be terribly dangerous. Poirot set his cup down. So Boehmer? Finch? Another? Miss Marple shook her head. Mrs. Boehmer is dramatic, but not vengeful. Clara Finch is loyal, perhaps bitter, but not impulsive. No, I suspect someone quieter, someone who could prepare a poison in secret, someone who moves about the ship unseen. Poirot straightened sharply. The crew, Miss Marple nodded. And among them, someone we haven't properly accounted for. At that moment, the door opened and Nady, Captain Rochester, entered, holding a small envelope. I've been looking for you, he said. This was found inside the crew locker room. No one knows how it got there. He handed the envelope to Poirot. Poirot opened it carefully. Inside was a torn piece of paper. On it, written in hurried, uneven letters, were the words, "Forgive me, Clara. I thought he would take the drink." Miss Marple gasped softly. Poirot stiffened. "Clara," he murmured. "Clara Finch." The captain frowned. "But that doesn't make sense. Clara has been in full view during much of this." Poirot looked at Miss Marple. Clara knew Dalton's business with Pendleton. She handled documents that could ruin him. She understood Dalton's pressure on Pendleton. She may have known Dalton's enemies as well. Miss Marple leaned back slowly. Or perhaps someone knew Clara's feelings. Clara is loyal, but loyalty creates vulnerability. If someone else wrote this note to throw suspicion on Clara, it may mean she is in danger. Poirot's expression hardened. "Captain, we must find Clara Finch immediately." As they rushed toward the upper decks, the ship shuddered once more, this time not from waves, but from the sudden shift of weight as passengers moved about, spreading a new rumor that someone else had been attacked. Miss Marple quickened her steps. "Mr. Poirot, this has become urgent." Poirot nodded grimly. "Yes, Miss Marple, someone is tying up loose ends." They reached the observation lounge, where a cluster of passengers had gathered in confusion. Through the parted crowd, they saw Clara Finch standing at the railing, pale, trembling, gripping the edge as though struggling to breathe. A steward stood beside her, trying to calm her. Poirot rushed forward. "Mademoiselle Finch, are you harmed?" Clara turned, eyes wide with terror. "Mr. Poirot, someone was in my cabin. My papers, they've been taken." Miss Marple placed a steadying hand on her back. "Taken, dear? Which papers?" Clara swallowed. "The contracts, the ones that tie Dalton to Pendleton. They're gone." Poirot's face hardened. "So the motive is business and something deeply personal." Clara began to cry quietly. "Someone wants Dalton destroyed, but Pendleton drank the wrong glass. I never meant." She froze. Poirot froze. Miss Marple froze. Poirot leaned in sharply. "You never meant what, mademoiselle?" Clara's face went white as linen. I never meant for Pendleton to drink it," she whispered. Silence cracked through the room. Poirot stepped forward, voice low but fierce. "Mademoiselle Finch, do you mean you knew about the poison?" Clara covered her mouth. "I knew," she choked. "I knew someone planned to harm him, but I thought it was meant for Dalton." Miss Marple said softly. "Clara, my dear, who meant to harm him?" Clara tremblingly whispered, "Robert Halley." Poirot's eyes flared. Miss Marple whispered, "Then Halley wasn't only running, he was hunting." Clara nodded weakly. "He told me Dalton ruined his life, that Dalton destroyed his family's business. He said this voyage would fix everything." Poirot breathed out. "Sacrebleu, we must find Halley before he strikes again." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, because if Dalton was the real target, he is still in danger." And far below deck, as though answering her words, A metallic scream echoed through the hull, a sound like something heavy thrown or struggling in the dark. The ship shuddered. Poirot and Miss Marple turned toward the lower stairwell at the same moment. Poirot whispered, "Miss Marple, the end game has begun." Chapter 6. Justice at Dawn. The ship trembled again, a deep, metallic reverberation that rolled through the lower decks, like the groan of some ancient sea creature turning in its sleep. Poirot and Miss Marple exchanged a glance and hurried toward the stairwell, Clara Finch trailing closely behind them, pale and shaking. "Stay behind us, mademoiselle," Poirot said firmly. "If Halley is near, he is desperate. A cornered man is the most dangerous kind." The ship lurched slightly as they descended, the lights flickering overhead. Far below, the faint hum of machinery mingled with the clang of metal on metal, still echoing from the earlier noise. The corridor ahead was dim, illuminated by narrow electric lamps that cast long shadows across the walls. Miss Marple leaned lightly on the railing as they reached the lower landing. She paused, listening. Even in crisis, her eyes remained calm, thoughtful. "Mr. Poirot," she murmured, "that sound came from the maintenance passage just aft of the galley." Poirot nodded. "Just so, and it is the least populated area at this hour." They moved toward the passage, their footsteps muffled by the narrow metal grating. The air felt cooler here, a faint draught threading through the corridor, carrying with it the scent of damp machinery and old steel. When they turned the corner, they saw him, a man crouched near a storage locker, shoulders heaving with ragged breaths. His uniform coat was torn, his hair wild. When he turned, his eyes gleamed with equal parts fear and fury. "Robert Halley." Clara let out a small cry and stepped back. Poirot raised a hand, calmly. "Monsieur Halley," he said quietly, "running only increases suspicion. Come away from there." Halley backed farther, against the locker. "Stay back, all of you. I am not going anywhere with you." Poirot stayed perfectly still. "We wish only to talk, to understand." Halley's voice cracked. "Understand? You can't understand what he did to me, what Dalton did. He took everything. My family's business ruined. My father dead within the year, all because of his lies, his schemes." Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice soft as warm linen. "And so you planned to poison him?" Halley's breath shook. "I didn't plan it, not at first. But when I saw his name on the passenger list, when I realized I would be on the same ship," his expression twisted. "Fate put him in front of me. How could I not act?" Poirot spoke gently. "So you acquired a substance, a poison. You placed it in a bottle hidden below deck." Halley nodded, trembling. "I knew the steward's routes. I knew when the champagne would be poured. I waited. Dalton always orders 2 glasses, one early, one during the toast. I slipped it in quickly, when no one was looking." Miss Marple frowned. "But Pendleton drank that glass instead." Halley dragged a hand across his face, anguished. "I didn't mean for him to. I didn't know he'd take Dalton's glass. I wanted Dalton, only Dalton." Poirot stepped closer. "Then why did you flee? Why hide?" "Because you'd never believe me," Halley spat. "Because Pendleton recommended me, ha! He only did that because he wanted leverage. He knew I blamed Dalton. He wanted to use me. And then, someone else, started moving against me." Poirot and Miss Marple exchanged a brief look. "Someone else," Poirot repeated. Halley nodded urgently. "Someone who sent notes, threats, someone who wanted to make sure I took the blame, someone who pushed Boehmer, someone who stole Clara's documents, someone who..." Before he could finish, a figure emerged at the end of the corridor. Tall, cold-faced, still as stone. "Mr. Alfred Dalton," Clara gasped. Poirot stiffened. Miss Marple's needles would have paused had she been knitting. Dalton stepped forward slowly, hands clasped behind his back. "So," he said calmly, "you found our runaway steward." Halley recoiled. "You stay away from me." Dalton ignored him, turning instead to Poirot. "Mr. Poirot, this man is dangerous. I've told the captain as much. He's unstable, untrustworthy, and now he's confessing to attempted murder." Poirot remained frozen, studying Dalton's face. Miss Marple watched the businessman with quiet, piercing attention. There was something in his eyes, controlled, sharpened, not surprise, but calculation. "Mr. Dalton," she said softly, "how fortunate you arrived at just this moment." Dalton glanced at her, expression smooth. "I heard the alarm. Naturally, I came to assist." Poirot stepped slightly ahead of Miss Marple. "Monsieur Dahl?" But he stopped, because Dalton's coat was missing a button, a perfectly round, glossy black button, identical to the one Miss Marple found, beside Mrs. Boehmer's collapsed body. The realization settled like a stone in their chests. Hallie saw it too. "You!" he shouted. "You framed me! You came after me! You!" Dalton's expression hardened with sudden fury. "You fool, Hallie! You couldn't even poison the right man." Silence cracked through the corridor. Poirot inhaled sharply. "So, it is you!" Dalton stepped forward, face darkening. "Pendleton was going to ruin me. He had documents that would destroy my reputation. I had to act. And Boehmer knew about Monte Carlo, knew too much. She would have exposed everything, you think. I would let a ruined gambler and a glittering parasite destroy my future?" Miss Marple's voice was quiet. "You lured her to that corridor," Dalton sneered. "A simple note, delivered by a frightened steward who never questioned orders." Hallie trembled. "You wanted me blamed for everything." Dalton's lips curled. "Why not? You already hated me. It was perfect." Poirot's voice was steel. "And Pendleton? Why poison him?" Dalton snapped. "I didn't. The glass was meant for me. Hallie's incompetence saved my life." Poirot nodded slowly. "And then you seized the opportunity. You attempted to kill Boehmer, to eliminate loose ends. You stole Clara's documents to protect yourself, and you hunted Hallie to silence him." Miss Marple stepped forward, her gentle voice cutting through Dalton's rising rage. "But you made one mistake, Mr. Dalton." Dalton laughed bitterly. "And what is that?" "You underestimated people," Miss Marple said softly, "especially the quiet ones." Dalton lunged toward Hallie, but Poirot and two stewards, who had arrived silently behind Dalton, seized him instantly. Dalton struggled, roaring like a trapped bull, but they held firm. "Miss," Marple exhaled slowly. "Thank goodness." Poirot nodded gravely. "It is over." But Miss Marple shook her head. "Not quite," she whispered, because above them the infirmary bell had begun to ring. Mr. Pendleton was awake and ready to speak. The ship's internal bell echoed sharply. Overhead 3 chiming bursts, urgent yet controlled. Poirot's eyes flashed. "He is awake," he said. "Pendleton. He can confirm all of this." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, Mr. Poirot, and I believe he has much to say." Dalton, now restrained by 2 stewards, jerked violently against their grip. "You fools! Pendleton will twist everything. He always did. He ruined lives for sport." Poirot stepped close, his gaze cold. "And yet you attempted murder twice." Dalton glared. "I protected myself. It was survival." Miss Marple's eyes softened not with sympathy, but with understanding. "Many terrible things have been called survival, Mr. Dalton, but the sea sees clearly." They began to escort Dalton upward through the stairwell, Hallie walking behind them under guard. Clara followed with trembling steps, keeping close to Miss Marple. The closer they came to the infirmary, the more the air shifted. Passengers lingered anxiously in nearby corridors, whispering, glancing toward the pale morning light now filtering through portholes. Somewhere, a steward was quietly closing shutters. Somewhere else, silverware clinked nervously in the breakfast lounge. The storm had passed, but something in the ship, something human, had not. Inside the infirmary, the doctor stood near Pendleton's bed, adjusting the blankets with tight, efficient movements. Mrs. Boehmer slept lightly on the bed beside him, her breathing steady. Pendleton himself lay propped on pillows, eyes open and sharp. His skin was pale as parchment, but his expression, proud, cold, calculating, was unmistakably his. When he saw Dalton being brought in, his smile sharpened. "Ah," he rasped. "The rat surfaces." Dalton lunged again, but the stewards held him firmly. Poirot raised a hand. "Gentlemen, control yourselves. This is now a matter for truth, not anger." Pendleton coughed weakly. "Truth? Yes, that will be refreshing." Miss Marple stepped forward. "Mr. Pendleton, you spoke earlier." "Not him, the other." "Whom did you mean?" Pendleton's gaze flicked to Dalton, then to Hallie, then back. "Dalton tried to ruin me," he said, voice hoarse. "That much is obvious. But before I collapsed, I saw something." Poirot leaned in. "What did you see, monsieur?" Pendleton wet his lips with effort. The waiter placed the glass in front of Dalton, and then Dalton switched it. Quickly, subtly, he moved Pendleton's glass aside and replaced it. Dalton froze. Poirot stiffened. "You are saying Dalton knew the glass was poisoned?" Pendleton nodded. Hallie saw what he did, and Dalton switched the glasses. "He meant for me to die, not for him." Gasps rippled through the Paris room. Dalton's face drained of color. "He's lying! I didn't know." Miss Marple shook her head softly. "Mr. Dalton, that missing button. Mrs. Boehmer attacked. Clara's stolen documents. Hallie's pursuit. Your presence near every incident." She paused gently. "Guilt clings to you." Dalton trembled with rage and fear. "He's framing me. Pendleton always manipulated everyone." Pendleton laughed a thin, wretched sound. "Perhaps, but not today." Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm, resolute. "Monsieur Dalton, the evidence is clear. You tried to kill Pendleton after realizing Hallie's plan unfolded incorrectly. You attacked Boehmer to silence her, and you pursued Hallie to eliminate him." Dalton shook violently. "You have no proof." Miss Marple's soft voice cut through the tension like a seam ripper through thread. "Oh, but we do," she said gently. "We have proof. In your behavior, in your movements, in the way you arrived exactly when Hallie accused you." Poirot nodded. "You came too quickly, too conveniently. You knew where Hallie was hiding." Dalton stared at them, wild-eyed. "I will ruin you for this," he spat. Poirot stiffened with dignity. "You will do no such thing." The captain stepped forward. "Mr. Dalton, you are under ship's arrest until we dock." Dalton sagged, defeated. As he was escorted away, Hallie watched, eyes brimming with tears, not triumph, but exhausted clarity. Miss Marple touched his arm gently. "This was never your path, Robert. Revenge corrodes the one who carries it." Hallie nodded weakly. "I only wanted justice." Poirot answered softly. "Justice, monsieur, is not accomplished with poison." The doctor motioned for quiet as Pendleton coughed again, weaker this time. Miss Marple leaned closer. "Is there anything more, Mr. Pendleton?" Pendleton's cold eyes softened just slightly. "Clara, my papers, protect her," he whispered. Clara pressed a hand to her chest. "Mr. Pendleton." Pendleton exhaled, eyes fluttering shut. "Tell Boehmer, Monte Carlo, I forgave her." Miss Marple laid a gentle hand on his arm. Poirot whispered, "He is sleeping." The doctor nodded. "He'll survive now. The danger has passed." Miss Marple turned toward the porthole where the first warm rays of sunrise spread across the sea, turning the waves to molten gold. Poirot stood beside her. "It is over," he said, quietly. Miss Marple smiled softly. "Yes, justice is like dawn, Mr. Poirot. Slow to arrive, but always inevitable." He bowed his head slightly. "A poetic sentiment, Miss Marple." She folded her hands. "Not poetic, only true." Behind them, passengers murmured. The captain issued orders. The sea breathed calmly, and the long, dark night of secrets finally yielded to morning light. Chapter 7. The Calm After Secrets. Morning aboard the SS Ardenleigh arrived with a surprising gentleness. The storm had swept through with its fury, but the sea now lay quiet, smooth as polished glass, reflecting a pale gold sky. It was as if nature, having spent its rage, offered a deliberate sense of peace as recompense. Passengers slowly emerged from their cabins, tentative at first, as though unsure whether calm could be trusted after such a night. Conversation was softer, behaviors more subdued. People exchanged polite nods, whispered questions, and long, reflective glances. A sense of collective humility settled over the ship. They had all been close, uncomfortably close to danger. In the quiet breakfast lounge, Miss Marple sipped her tea, hands wrapped around the warm porcelain. She watched the window as sunlight danced across the water, brightening the patterns of passing waves. She looked softer today, thoughtful, content to observe the day's new quiet. Poirot entered precisely at the hour he intended, impeccably dressed, every hair in place, his moustache catching a glint of morning light. He approached Miss Marple with his usual blend of dignity and warmth. "Bon matin, Miss Marple," he said, offering a slight bow. "The sea, she is in her best mood again." Miss Marple smiled. "Yes, it always amazes me how quickly calm returns after a storm, both on the ocean and among people." "Indeed," Poirot replied, sitting opposite her, "though some storms leave lasting marks." Miss Marple nodded. "Even the gentlest sea has depth, and every person carries more beneath the surface than they show." Poirot gave a small, admiring smile. "Beautifully said, mademoiselle." A steward brought them fresh tea and lightly toasted bread with butter. Poirot thanked him with an elegant nod, then folded his hands. "The captain informs me that Mr. Dalton is secured in a private cabin," he said. "We shall deliver him to authorities upon docking." Miss Marple nodded softly, not with triumph, but with a quiet acceptance. "Some consequences," she said gently, "arrive by sea, and some by land." Poirot looked at her curiously. "You feel sympathy?" "For the wounded parts of him," Miss Marple replied. "Not for the harm he caused, certainly, but human. Nature is rarely simple." Poirot considered this. "Perhaps you are right," but he chose the path he walked. Just then, Clara Finch entered the lounge. She looked exhausted, her eyes swollen from restless hours, yet there was a new steadiness in her step, a relieved clarity. She saw the detectives and approached. "Mr. Poirot, Miss Marple," she said, voice soft but anchored, "I wanted to thank you." Poirot inclined his head. "How is Pendleton?" "The doctor says his recovery will be slow but assured," Clara said. Her expression softened. "Before he slept again, he asked for me, properly. Not as his assistant, but as someone he trusted." She blinked, touched. "He even apologized." Miss Marple gave a small, warm smile. "Oh, my dear, that must have meant a great deal." Clara nodded. "It did." Poirot, ever the analyst, tilted his head. "And Boma?" Clara exhaled. "Awake. The doctor said she'll recover fully." She looked down for a moment. She asked after Pendleton. "Twice. And when I told her he forgave her, she cried." Miss Marple's knitting needles moved silently in her mind, a quiet understanding knitting itself together. "Some wounds," she said softly, "are far older than poisons." Clara smiled weakly. "Thank you both, for everything." When she left, Poirot leaned in slightly. "Miss Marple." "Yes, Mr. Poirot?" "You see things," he said quietly, "that I, with all my order and logic, do not." Miss Marple blushed faintly. "Oh dear, I wouldn't say that. I teens 2-1, B falls." "But I would," Poirot insisted. "The glass, the button, Dalton's expression, you saw the human truth behind each. You understand people, as if you have known them all your life." Miss Marple chuckled softly. "Living in a small village gives a person a certain perspective." Poirot smiled. "Indeed." Opened. The lounge door opened again, and Robert Halley was escorted in by a crewman. He looked calmer now, ashen, but composed. He approached the detectives. "I'm to meet with the captain shortly," he said, "but I wanted to speak with you first." Miss Marple looked at him kindly. "Yes, Mr. Halley?" He rubbed his palms together, eyes lowered. "I confess to placing the poison. I won't deny that. I intended harm. But I never meant for Pendleton to take that glass, and I didn't touch Boma, or send Clara threatening notes." Poirot nodded. "No, Dalton took advantage of your actions, used your plans to hide his own." Halley's voice cracked. "Does that make it better? That I wasn't the only villain here?" Miss Marple's voice was soft. "It makes you human. Humans make desperate choices when wounded, but you stepped back. You regretted. You wrote a note for Clara because you didn't want a life lost that wasn't intended. Hallie swallowed. And Dalton? Poirot answered firmly. He will face justice for what he did. Hallie exhaled shakily. I will too. I know that. Miss Marple gave a gentle nod. Yes, but healing is different from punishment. One is for the world. The 5 other is for the soul. Hallie looked at her with grateful eyes. Thank you, he whispered. The crewman led him away. Poirot stood. We should go on deck, he said softly. The dawn keeps her best colours for those who seek clarity. Miss Marple rose with a quiet sigh. Yes, it will do us good. Ray teamed. Together they stepped onto the upper deck. The air was crisp, washed clean by the storm. The sky was a soft palette of rose and gold, the sun rising like justice itself, slow, bright, and patient. Passengers gathered quietly at the railings, speaking in softer tones than they had spoken in days. Some nodded to Poirot and Miss Marple with subtle gratitude. Others avoided their eyes the unsettled, the reflective, the guilty in small personal ways. Poirot and Miss Marple stood side by side, watching the sea. Another case concluded, Poirot said. Miss Marple shook her head lightly. Oh, Mr. Poirot, human stories are never truly concluded, only continued somewhere else. Poirot smiled. And yet, Miss Marple, this one, it ends well. Miss Marple watched the sunlight dance on the waves. Yes, she murmured, for now. But her eyes, sharp, kind, experienced, knew the truth. Every calm sea carries a deeper tide. Later that evening, the SS Ardenleigh cruised steadily toward its destination. The storm was now nothing more than a memory, faded like a shadow leaving the body it once clung to. Warm lamplight glowed along the decks, and gentle music drifted from the dining hall passengers attempting, in their own ways, to reclaim the voyage they had expected. Miss Marple found herself on the starboard deck, seated comfortably with her knitting. The sea stretched dark and calm, stars beginning to appear one by one in the deepening sky. She hummed softly as she worked, the simple rhythm of her needles fitting perfectly with the quiet night. Poirot joined her a few moments later, holding a small cup of after-dinner chocolate. Ah, Miss Marple, he said contentedly, the night is peaceful again. She nodded. Yes, amazing how quickly peace can return, once truth is brought into the open. Poirot leaned slightly against the railing. The ship feels lighter. As do people, Miss Marple added. Poirot chuckled. And yet, with so many secrets, I fear our fellow passengers will not soon forget this journey. Miss Marple smiled. Nor should they. Storms, weather, or human, teach us things. Poirot looked impressed. You grow more philosophical by the hour, Miss Marple. Oh dear, she laughed softly. I suppose age does that. Poirot gave a respectful nod. Ages gives clarity and perspective. Moments later, Clara Finch appeared, walking quietly along the deck. She carried a small envelope in her hands. When she spotted them, she approached shyly. Miss Marple, Mr. Poirot, she said, I'm sorry to disturb you. You are never a disturbance, mademoiselle, Poirot assured her. Clara offered the envelope to Miss Marple. This was in Mr. Pendleton's desk. He wanted you both to have it. Miss Marple opened the envelope. Inside were 2 handwritten notes, Pendleton's last clear thoughts written the night before his collapse. The first note read, To Mr. Poirot, truth can be cruel, but it is always necessary. Use it well. The second, To Miss Marple, you see people as I never did. Thank you. Miss Marple's eyes softened. Poirot bowed deeply. Pendleton was many things, but he was not blind. Clara nodded. He asked me to handle his affairs with fairness. For once, he trusted someone. Miss Marple squeezed her hand gently. Take care of yourself, my dear. You have been through much. Clara smiled gratefully and walked away toward the cabins. Poirot watched her go. She will find strength, he murmured. She already has, Miss Marple said quietly. As night deepened, the ship glided smoothly through, the dark, lanterns glowing warmly along its length. Passengers settled in for music, tea, or quiet conversation. The atmosphere was softer, now gentler. Poirot and Miss Marple remained on deck, letting the cool sea air settle around them. Poirot sipped his chocolate thoughtfully. "You know, Miss Marple," he said after a while, "we make quite the formidable pair." Miss Marple chuckled. "Two very different minds, seeing two sides of the same truth." Poirot nodded. "Logic and order combined with intuition and observation." Miss Marple smiled at him. "A rather good partnership, Mr. Poirot." "Aye." Poirot bowed elegantly. "A pleasure beyond measure." They watched the horizon together, two brilliant minds, two gentle souls united by mystery and by a shared respect that transcended style or method. The ship's horn sounded softly in the distance, a signal, a promise of land approaching. Poirot set down his cup. "Our voyage ends tomorrow." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, and we return to our own worlds." Poirot smiled. "But perhaps they will cross again one day?" Miss Marple looked up at the stars. "Oh, I believe so. People who walk through storms together seldom forget one another." "Lest, lated, ass." Poirot placed a hand on the railing. "Then let us say not farewell, but until next time." Miss Marple folded her knitting and rose. "Until next time, Mr. Poirot." And as the SS Ardenleigh sailed steadily toward the morning, two detectives, one Belgian, one from Street Mary Mead, shared a quiet moment of friendship that would linger long after the voyage ended. Calm had returned to the sea, but the memory of truth, their shared triumph, remained afloat. As the SS Ardenleigh glided into the soft glow of morning, calm waves brushed gently against her hull, as though the sea itself sought to soothe the memories of the long, turbulent nights behind her. The passengers gathered quietly along the rails, their voices hushed with reflection rather than fear. The storm, the secrets, the near tragedies, all felt distant now, softened by the golden rise of a new day. In a quiet corner of the deck, Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot stood side by side, their gazes meeting the horizon. No grand speeches were needed. The gentle understanding between them spoke more deeply than words could. They had uncovered the truth, protected the innocent, and ensured justice prevailed in its calm, inevitable way. Clara Finch watched from a distance, finding strength in the peacefulness she had long forgotten. Mrs. Beaumer, recovered and thoughtful, leaned quietly against the railing, letting the wind carry away old regrets. Even Robert Halley, weighed down by consequences, felt a fragile sense of closure as the ship neared shore. As land came into view, Poirot tipped his hat to Miss Marple. "Until our paths cross again," and she smiled, knowing they certainly would. If you enjoyed our story, please subscribe to the channel for more cozy mystery adventures.